It is 9:02 a.m. on Wednesday, August the 9th, 2023, and I'm going to call the meeting of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority Board together. Raymond, would you do roll call and then advise whether or not we have public comment this morning?
Certainly. Ms. Wilson?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Ms. Bird? Here. Ms. Bettis?
Here.
And Ms. Enriquez is not here just yet. We also received word that Mr. Reyes and Ms. Stevens will be out today.
Okay.
But we do have a quorum.
We do have a quorum. Okay.
Yes, ma'am, we've not received any requests for public comment.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move to agenda item 2, adoption of the minutes for the RMA board meeting of July 12th, 2023. Hopefully everyone has received them, had an opportunity to review. Unless you have comments, questions, or proposed changes, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
I second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Item number 3 has multiple components. I'm going to read them all into the record so we can just go through them. Discussion and action on board resolutions authorizing the following actions as recommended by the Finance Committee. A, adoption of the CRRMA budget for fiscal year 2024. B, adoption of an updated RMA investment policy, including designation of the investment officers and authorization of training as appropriate. C, execution of engagement letter with Gibson, Ruddock, Patterson, LLC for the fiscal year 2023 annual audit. And D, execution of engagement letters with Pena, Briones, McDaniel and Company for the provision of general certified public accountant services.
Joyce, can you get closer to your mic?
Oh, sure, sorry. And to, let me just push it up here then. To, where am I? Okay, D, execution of general engagement letters with Pena, Briones, McDaniel and Company for the provision of 1, general certified public accountant services, and 2, vehicle registration fee program audit services. And with that, I will turn it over to who? Robert?
Good morning, Robert Suter, Director of Finance. For the record, as a reminder, this is my board meeting, and I'll be handling all of the items from here on out, but specifically and for sure, these items. So we'll start with 3A, and IT, if you could bring up the PowerPoint. Thank you. I'll go back to this. Okay, so Finance Committee reviewed all of these items, including the budget, at its last Finance Committee meeting on Monday. IT, we're getting some feedback here. So thank you to the Finance Committee for your time and attention. We actually reviewed a proposed budget at our July Finance Committee meeting, and then we reviewed a revised version, which you'll see in front of you today at our meeting on Monday. We did have a couple changes from proposed. We heard some feedback here, and then there's a couple items that changed as well, so we did make a couple of changes. We'll run through current year actuals and projections, a quick overview of the budget, and then we'll go into depth on the revenue and the appropriations. We'll then talk about the bike share, and finally the budget resolution, which is what formally adopts the budget. So first is our current year actuals and projections. So on the left, you've got the category of our different revenue sources, and then that first column is the budget, our actuals through the third quarter, the percent of budget through the third quarter, followed by a forecast and a forecast percent of budget. So I'd like to draw your eye to the very bottom line that says interest income, and you'll note that we only budgeted $60,000, but with the aggressive policy of the Fed, rates have risen dramatically. We've also passed the last hurdle with the city and Wells Fargo to be able to invest more aggressively, and so with that we are planning to end the fiscal year well over budget, and that's really good for the RMA. The line above that is project admin fees. As a reminder, every time that we approve a project here at the board, the RMA is taking a fee from that. However, we often extend those projects or amend the scope, as we're going to do today with John Hayes on item 5. And when we do that, it delays when the RMA receives its fee. We will collect those fees, and with the committee, I showed them a list of all the projects we have currently approved by the board and then pending projects. And it is a substantial number of projects and therefore good fees. But when we collect them is not really relevant because we are going to. We don't have cash flow concerns, but we have not collected as many as we had hoped. I'll give you an example. Weiler, you may recall last month, we did amendments to add additional design for security and for bathrooms. Had we not done that, that design could have wrapped up in this fiscal year. We could have received those fees. Instead, that project will go on longer. Additional fees will be received by the RMA for those amendments, but we won't collect that until next year. No concerns. We've had this for a couple of years. We've been in design of a lot of projects that we keep extending. Fabens Airport hangars, we keep adding scope to that. And so as we do that, it just means we don't collect our fees as soon as we may have otherwise thought.
Do we book them as accrued, or?
We don't because we are not invoicing and have
Okay.
just yet to receive payment. We have not even invoiced on those yet. We wait till the end of the project.
So they only hit the books once you invoice and collect?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. So there's no concern here. I just thought it'd be important to bring that up.
Yes, you explained that interest income figure, the difference?
Yes,
but
sir.
As I count on my fingers and toes, it's kind of hard to come up with that big of a delta between forecast and actual. So you want to go over that one more time? Because-
Yes. So through the third quarter, we had only received interest payments through April. April is when the second week of April is when we cleared the hurdle with Wells Fargo, where there's a little sticky situation where they were saying they couldn't do something, and so we had to work through it with the city. We finally got past that the second week of April. As you mentioned, Ms. Wilson, with the accruals, when we get paid for interest in May, interest earned in May, we don't receive it till June. So when I got the third quarter report, I only had 2/3 of April, and that's what you see, the 127,000 is up to that point in the current fiscal year, plus only 2 weeks of, or 2/3 of April. We since have May, June, July, and August that are going to be invested at way higher rates and way more aggressively. That might be conservative on how much we end up making this year. We were making 80,000 a month, I think, in May and June. And so I have no concerns about hitting that number, but it's a great question of how we get from such low actuals in the third quarter to my projection at year end. And we'll bring these back and we can talk about these in depth when we do the audit. We can do a full update on where we finish this year if you'd like, or I know the Finance Committee will review it, but it's that little quirkiness that has led to the low current year through the third quarter before we hit the full year amount.
Okay, thank you.
It's a great question, actually. So the other item I'd like to point out is the first row, America's Interchange BABS credit. We'll talk about this more on item number 4, but this will be the last BABS credit we get. You may recall that we refinanced these loans in January, and we took advantage of that. We're the only, I believe, entity that took advantage of that program this year. But doing so meant we paid less interest, and therefore we get less of a credit in the current year. These are our projections, or our budget, our actuals, and forecast for our expenses. So for salaries and benefits, I'm projecting us right at budget. In the section below that is contract services. You may recall our practice is to give the budget maybe a little bit high, but give us plenty of wiggle room, and then our history is to consistently come in under budget. So annual audit's going to finish right where it is. We do have $25,000 budgeted for CPA services. That agreement for next year is coming up. We don't use that historically as much as we used to, but if I won the lottery last night and I didn't show up today, Raymond would need the ability to use that CPA to help out until he was able to get somebody else on. So we do budget $25,000, and then we're spending well below that. The VRF audit is a pass-through with the county. You may recall they asked for additional audit services looking at the VRF, and so they reimburse us for that $12,000. Arbitrage rebate services is actually a success that I'd like to share. So I was reviewing the trust indenture for the VRF program. I noticed something I'd never seen before, which is that the trust and the pledged revenues can pay for arbitrage services. We've never done that, starting with 2014. It's about $19,000. We have subsequently invoiced the VRF program, the trustee, and should have been, I guess in August, we'll receive a $19,000 payment to reimburse us not only for these expenses, but expenses incurred in prior years. And so that's a victory for us. Yes, and so you'll see actually in the budget for next year, we used to have $5,000, we have nothing. So it's a small win, but it's worth sharing. We do have the management agreement with the city whereby we pay for a senior accountant. We're getting fantastic service right now. That is absolutely worth it. But we originally budgeted for half a person, and every year, you may recall, we renegotiate with them and look at the actual hours. It's been at a third consistently, and so we're only paying for about a third, but we budget for the half. We will renegotiate with them in February, and then the second half of the year, we may end up paying a half if it's been more hours, but we budget for the full half of a person. Media and outreach is there if we need it, but we do use it for the newsletter, for hosting our website. General engineering consultant. So this one, I'll go back to last September. The board authorized the RMA, the executive director, to spend up to $100,000 for support, grant writing support for the IIJA. Wasn't budgeted. We did a budget amendment. That was in last year. We had no expenses related to it. It's in the budget for next year. I'm calling it out as a separate line item. Separately, we also had the indefinite deliverable contract where we brought on 4 design firms to rotate through. So we did not know at the end of last year if Atkins was going to have any additional expenses related to that. They did not, so we didn't have any expenses on that either. So it looks really low with this really giant budget. That's the reason why, is those 2 items. As a reminder, we do budget $10,000 annually for small emergent issues that come up, and we can just immediately lean on Atkins. We don't have to, it's not something that's a project necessarily, work authorization. I think we've used it once or twice since I've been here in 5 years, and never more than a few $100s. But, and that's granted through a work authorization with Atkins number 8, I believe, many years ago. After that is legal services. We raise the budget in the current year, and we do every other year. It goes up and it goes down based on the legislative session. Wasn't a lot of activity this year, so we don't have a lot of expenses related to it. Next year's budget, and you'll see it in subsequent slides, is going to drop back down to the baseline level. Below that is our operating expenditures. So we've got travel. As a reminder, Mr. Tejas and I attended the Texas Transportation Forum in Austin earlier this year prior to the legislative session. There's quite a few other small items in there. We consistently hit those under budget. And then there's the bike share contribution that we'll make that's separate from what we're going to do in next year's budget at the direction of Ms. Wilson. So this is kind of giving you a words of what I just described, so you can read it there on the slide, but just an update on those items. So let's talk our budget for next year. As a reminder, fiscal year starts September 1st and runs through August 31st. This is our operating budget as an organization. It has nothing to do with the project budgets that the board is approving when we bring a project to you. Does, however, include admin fees from those project budgets, so an expense to the project and a revenue to the RMA. Those revenues are booked within here. Major variances, the increase in investment revenue, and that's going to be really big for next year as rates are even higher now than they were, I guess, a month ago, and we are being much more aggressive. And so if rates stay elevated, and I think current forecasts are there shouldn't be a cut until April, that means we're going to make quite a bit of money investing. We have also added funding for a 3rd position. We're very early on this. Raymond and I have had quite a few discussions and have talked through several options of what that may look like, but we're not there yet. It's enough that if we hire somebody, hopefully at some point during the year, we've got it covered. If we need more, we'll come back to you all, but we have started down that path. We also have that board-approved IIJA grant support, and if we do spend, let's say, $20,000 this year, next year's budget will budget $80,000, and we'll just keep track of that as we go. And then last is that increased support for Sun Cycle. So the purple column is the 2024 budget for next year, and you can see we are projected to lose just under $90,000 if we collected every revenue and spent every dollar. You know we don't spend every dollar that we have. Let's just say we don't spend anything on IIJA. We're not going to have that. But starting out, that's what it looks like, at least early on. We may end up collecting more in project revenue. We may end up making more in interest revenue. Lots of things could change, not something that I'm concerned about. A change, and again, we'll discuss this in item 4, is we've removed the revenue for the interchange, the BABS credit that we have for America's interchange, and that's SIB loan. And that is as a result of a recent city council decision, but that is coming out. That was one of our longest revenues. We've had it for like a dozen years. It was decreasing every single year as we paid down the debt, and our interest payment went down, we were getting less, and we'll talk about that in 4, but that's the other big change that I haven't mentioned so far. Appropriations, we talked about the arbitrage rebate services. That's a win. We're saving money every single year, and then the bike share contribution has also gone up. So as a reminder, we have no taxing authority. We have to sing for our supper. So one of our revenue sources is from the VRF bond issuances. We are hitting the 10th year of the first issuance, and that'll happen next June. Therefore, our 10-year payment of revenue, of admin fees from that will go away at that point. So I've only budgeted 9 payments. So where that has been $103,000 consistently since 2017, it's now going to drop below that because we're only going to get 9 of the payments related to VRF number 1. We'll still be getting 12 payments related to VRF number 2. We also get salary reimbursements for TxDOT funded projects. So we have Loop 375, frontage and widening that are both active right now. We have Pelicano Road, and we have the streetcar, and as you may recall, we did the procurement for that recently. We'll be bringing that procurement to the board, I believe, in September as well. That one, we will also have the ability to charge and receive admin fees, salary reimbursement for that. Now we'll talk the admin fees themselves. The board, or the committee has spent more time on this. I think we did a decent job at it last summer, and then we've talked about it on each subsequent finance committee meeting. But really, what happens is that we add scope to a project, increase our fee a little bit, but it means that we're not collecting our fee as timely as we may have originally thought. We're going to collect those fees. It's just a question of timing. We don't have cash flow issues, so I'm not concerned about it, but I just want to bring that to your attention. I used to, when I would do the budget, go and look at projects and see which ones are scheduled to finish, and that was a fool's errand because half of them would get amended, half of them would just not move as quickly as we originally had expected. So instead of doing that, I'm putting in a rough estimate instead of trying to very finely predict that. And then, of course, we have projects that get added almost every meeting and throughout the year, and so that could increase it, and the timing of those is interesting. So on revenue in that purple column, you'll see the changes that I've already discussed. We've removed the America's Interchange BAB credit. That's now 0. The VRF is lower because we'll have 3 fewer months of the payment to us. Salary reimbursements, I think, might actually finish up a little bit as Raymond's salary may go up, and so we're increasing just a little bit there. The VRF audit reimbursement, again, is just a pass-through with the county. The admin fees, I'm rounding and just putting 400,000. Could be higher, could be lower. And then interest and investment revenue, that's actually very conservative. I mentioned we were making $80,000 a month in May and June when we had rates at 5%. Rates are higher now. That's 12 months at 60,000. So that's actually underestimating, just because if rates come down again, I don't want to be overshooting. So we may end up exceeding that by a decent amount. But if rates drop really quickly and the Fed counters and sees inflation really pull back and the economy goes sideways, then we're not too far out over our skis in what we're projecting. Appropriations, this is a salary and benefits slide. So in that purple column, you'll see the budget. Again, we've added funding for a 3rd position. There's also funding to cover anticipated salary increases for Raymond and I based on our contracts. For some reason that doesn't happen, we probably won't adjust the budget. We'll just have savings. And then we've got funding in there for that 3rd position. Here are our contracts and our operating expenses. So in the second to last column, you can see the increase or decrease from last year. That's one right of the purple column. The annual audit, which we'll talk about in go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, question, what, the additional amount you budgeted for a 3rd person for the what if, how much is that amount that you put in there?
We put in $60,000 plus
Much?
60 plus the taxes and benefits associated with that. So depending on at what level and when, we think we should have sufficient, and it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. So I figured I'd just walk you through those increases. The increase to the audit is per the contract, and we'll talk about that one when we deal with the engagement letter. The arbitrage rebate services, I've mentioned twice, and you are going to hear me repeat things because those are the things that I want to make sure that you walk away with, and we don't have a huge budget where we've got, multiple days of talking through multiple departments. So I apologize if I'm getting repetitive, but not too many changes. So that arbitrage rebate was a win. The IIJ grant support was approved last September, but it was not part of the original budget last year. Legal services we are reducing because it's no longer legislative session. Below that, surety bonds, we've seen a slight price increase. Those are for the board members. We want to make sure we've got enough there. The TML insurance, we saw an increase last year. I wouldn't be surprised if we see one this year, so I've increased it just slightly to cover in case we need it. And then the bike share contribution, that's at the direction of Ms. Wilson. The Finance Committee has reviewed, but the idea is to give 3 years of support to the bike share to make sure it's on solid footing, and then use that to go out and try and get matching dollars from sponsors. But it gives the program frankly, make sure the program's going to survive for sure for 3 more years and thrive, and gives us a ton of stability. And so I think that's a good decision. This is, again, just a write-up of what we've talked about there. As a reminder, with the management services with agreement, we're currently paying 33%. The contract allows for us to pay up to half, but we're not getting that many hours, so we're using less, and we'll renew that next year. The bike share budget. So as a reminder, and I think you all have heard this repeatedly, it's analogous to transit. It does require additional funding outside of fare revenues. We have had a title sponsorship with El Paso Electric since June of 2021. We've received 3 $75,000 payments from them. I think it's been really successful. We've partnered with them on several events, provided bikes, gone to their events, and I think it's been very good. But we received the last payment in June. Most of our costs are fixed. And then as a reminder, we applied for and received a grant through the MPO for Transportation Alternative Set-Aside Program of $100,000 for FY24 and for FY25. That does have a $25,000 match. That will, however, allow us to buy hopefully around 40 bikes each of those 2 years, which is roughly half of our fleet that we'll be able to make the bring up to electric bikes, which we know people prefer, ride longer. And so that's actually a great thing, because we're getting bikes at 20% of the cost to upgrade half our fleet. So we've got money in there to cover that as well. Purple highlight again is the budget. You're seeing some changes. We are seeing revenue decrease slightly, so we're reflecting that here. We've got that contribution from the CRRMA. Investment earnings might be low, and so that would actually be a really nice story if we move those funds over here, help bring in some self-sustaining funds. We do plan on finishing the year with some funds on hand. And then our expenses, a couple small changes. Our software fees, B-Cycle, our provider, raised those this past January. It was the first time they'd raised them in, I believe, 10 years. So we're covering that. At the direction of the committee, we added some funding to cover travel. We had not touched that in a few years. That's only in the event that there's a B-Cycle World Conference. We've not heard of one. In the past, it's been in October, and we would have heard about it by now, so we won't spend that. We didn't spend it in the current year. So just an update there. Insurance, like on the organization side, TML may raise prices, so we're budgeting a little bit extra. Our credit card terminals also increased their cost, and so we're including that. That, I think, was just in April or May. And then we've got an increase on capital to make sure we can cover that $25,000 match. However, because we're going to replace and put in new bikes, it means we won't have to maintain the red bikes. Those red bikes, some of them go back to 2015, so we're going to be pulling those out, and for the bikes that are still in the fleet, we'll be using as what we can off of those bikes to maintain, so we hope to bring some of our maintenance costs down. So, the budget resolution is what formally adopts the budget, provides authority to be able to make budget transfers under $10,000, provided I provide a report to you. I think since we've instituted this, I've done that once or twice. Usually if we bring something to you, let's say we're going to add a position, we're going to add a fourth position, I don't do something, that IIJA grant support, we will put language in that resolution that authorizes us to do the budget transfer, and so we don't have to bring back to your report because you've already authorized it. So, happy to take any questions, but I do recommend approval of the budget as presented.
Just a comment. I went over that. I went over that budget. First off, kudos to you and to the finance committee. Yeah, I went over that, with a pretty fine tooth comb, and you answered every question I had in there, and I just wanted to give my compliments to you guys, because that's first off, it's an amazing job. It's an amazing budget. And I think it portrays pretty much what we do, and you did it very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would like to say something also. Yes, when we have the finance committee meeting, we actually take our time, and we have been there on an average lately of 2 hours. just to make sure that we go over every single thing in detail. I think our all-women committee is doing very well. And just like in the last meeting, I told Robert, I said, you make us come to a meeting. And what I mean by that is because he explains everything, any questions we have to ask, he answers them, and which is very well, because then we don't have to wait till the next meeting to get an answer from him. Even with Raymond, it's the same thing. So, and we laughed about it because I was like, you make us come to the meeting because we want to sit and learn so that when we get in this board meeting, we will be able to have a knowledgeable vote. So I think that's a great thing that we do actually for our committee. And like I said, it's all women.
Thank you.
Nothing against the men, but it's all women.
I will say I do appreciate your
That's
time.
why it's so detailed oriented.
I appreciate your time and your attention during those meetings. I do often worry I'm belaboring points, but I want to make sure you hear the important changes 3 and 4 times so they hopefully stick. And then if somebody asks you what you're spending or what's changed, you don't have to call me, you know the answer. Thank you.
And before we move forward with the motion, I want to thank the committee too for the time you spent on it. And thanks for the presentation today. I wanted to have that just for the record, the public record, even though several of you have gone through this, a lot of depth. I'm happy to see the added position, and we'll be interested to see what you want to do with that when the time comes, because there's a lot of work coming down the pike, and I do think there's going to be even more work with some of the projects coming forward, so there's going to be a lot to do for this organization. And also, if we can, as we start trying to get a little more visible and more public about knowledge about the things we're doing and how we can maybe partner with businesses and others to move infrastructure projects along, I think it'll be good to have some additional capacity and bench strength. And I also want to thank the committee for agreeing to add the funds for the bike share program from our income, our interest income, so that we do have continuity. And hopefully that will help with El Paso Electric maybe, extending, and hopefully even increasing their contribution for the next several years, and finding some other organizations that might be willing to partner with us too. So thank you. And if there's no other comments or questions, I'll entertain a motion to approve the budget resolution.
I was actually going to say we can wait and take all of these items.
Oh, we can?
Yeah,
Okay,
I think
that's fine.
that'd be an easier way to do things.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then I'll move on to item B, which has already been read into the record. This is an update of our investment policy, and I am asking you to adopt it today. There are some changes to it, and the backup is on your device if you'd like to pull it up. I attended the training on Public Finance Investment Act, which I'll refer to as the PFIA, back in May. And one of the things that another organization asked a question about is if an organization like the RMA has partnered with another investing entity, in our case the city, to invest on its behalf, which is what we're doing, does the first organization need to do anything? And the answer was yes. There's actually a provision in there in the PFIA that says, for the purposes of the act, if that situation is happening, the investment officer of the city serves as the investment officer of the RMA. So it's been the case for us, and that's just how it is, but we're going to make it explicit by putting it in our policy. That way it's clear to the public, clear to anyone that's looking at it, that yes, we have a management services agreement with the city that delegates them or directs them to invest our funds alongside theirs. We're going to do this just so it's clear. So you'll see on future investment reports, I'll have his signature on there as well, and he'll provide just a little bit of review. But that is the major change that's happening. And then the other thing we're doing is we're adding strategies for our different buckets of funds, and then a diversification. That diversification is important because we have funds with the VRF trustee outside of the city, and so we want to make sure that we're being clear to them on how we want to invest our funds and our communication with them. And so that's making sure that we're covered there as well. With that, when we get through the other 2 items, if there's no questions here, I will recommend approval. Mr. Smith?
I'm making the assumption from how you said that we're very happy with that investment relationship.
Yes, sir, yes. I will say it was frustrating, the hurdle we had to clear with Wells Fargo. That had really nothing to do with the city. The city actually helped us move that process along. We're very pleased. I've known the person, the Treasury Services Coordinator over there, for many years, and we meet frequently to talk, and I'm very happy with that. He's whip smart and knows what he's doing.
Thank you.
Item 3C is an execution of an engagement letter with Gibson Ruddock Patterson. You're familiar with them. We've had them as our auditor for several years. We re-procured in 2020, and we entered into a contract that has 9 one-year options, so we're asking to extend one more one-year option. This will be the 4th time with them. We have had them for quite a few years, though, and just as a reminder, the partner reviewing has changed, and that is something that is required. You can't have the same partner if you're with the same entity for 7 years. So we have had that change, and it's nice because you get a new set of eyes to look at things differently. But it's super helpful to have this Gibson Ruddock Patterson because they know us, they know our uniqueness. I will tell you, I called and gave them an update on the city's decision with the TRZ and the SIB loan that I'll go into detail in the next item, but we have a good working relationship with them. So this is to execute the engagement letter with them. Any questions on that one? Okay, D is 2 engagement letters with Peña Briones McDaniel. We do this as well every single year. Peña Briones McDaniel was the first audit firm of the RMA 15 years ago. They were kept on board to help out with accounting, and in fact, we're doing some of what I was doing prior to my position, but we do ask for an engagement letter to do the CPA services. So if we get into something with the auditor, they come to our defense, but they also help us if we have any questions throughout the year. That one I showed you during the budget. We're budgeting $25,000. We're spending maybe $4,000. And then the second one is the vehicle registration-free audit program that the county requested, and we have an agreement with the county where we'll do this. And in fact, in that agreement, it says that Peña Briones McDaniel will do that work. So with that, I recommend approval of items 3A, 3B, 3C, and 3D.
May I have a motion?
I motion it.
I have a motion and second. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Good presentations.
Thank you.
Item 4, update and discussion on the City of El Paso's Transportation Reinvestment Zone Number 2 and associated state infrastructure bank loans.
Good morning. So this is an update based on some action the City Council took last Monday. And then the Thursday prior to that, so about 2 weeks ago, I got a call from Robert Cortinas, the city's CFO. He was my boss in the budget office for many years, and we worked well together and have a good working relationship. And he said, okay, here's what's going on. The city's got, in fact, I'll pull this through. Instead of just casually telling you, let me do the PowerPoint. So we're going to do an update on the city's TRZ number 2 and the associated the state infrastructure bank loans that the CRRMA took out. As a reminder, in 2008, there was a comprehensive mobility plan that was identified all sorts of projects throughout the El Paso area. From that, $1 billion worth of projects were completed. The city's contribution, as agreed to with TxDOT, I believe at the time, was supposed to be around $70 million. To come up with that $70 million, they created TRZ number 2 and number 3, but we're only talking number 2 right now, and then turned around and pledged that revenue to the RMA. The RMA, in turn, went to the State Infrastructure Bank and borrowed money for those projects. We then service the debt. They transfer us TRZ revenue on a monthly basis, and we handle it that way. So the 3 loans we took out originally in 2011 was $30 million for America's Direct Connectors. So if you're on Loop 375 or I-10 and you want to get to the other one, you can do that conveniently now. You may not remember. We tend to forget, but we helped with the design of the first 3 of those. Then Direct Connectors at Zaragoza and Loop 375. And then more recently, 2 summers ago, we borrowed $30 million as the city's contribution on the I-10 widening project that's underway right now towards the state line. Is that the one on the west? Yes, ma'am. So the city, and these are the outstanding principal amounts as of July 31st, so almost $49 million. So the city had year-end savings of around $37 million. And so they asked us to if they gave us those funds to pay down the debt, and in doing so, it will dissolve the TRZ at the end of this calendar year because the debt has been satisfied. So they took that action last Monday, sent us $40 million. The TRZ is mature. It's producing beyond what is needed for debt service. So we've actually accumulated some, and that's about $8.5 million. So we took their 41 million they gave us. We're going to combine that with the 8.5 million we had on hand, and we'll pay down the loans. 2 of those loans had payment dates of August 1st. We can only pay off the debt on payment dates. So we hit it on August 1st, or we had to wait till February 1st. So the city was trying to move this along very quickly. We did give Ms. Bird and Ms. Wilson a heads up on this. The third loan is the one with the BABS credit. That is paid off on September 15th. So we will take the money that we have right now. We'll get the BABS credit. We'll use that. We'll pay that off. Any funds that have accumulated through interest earnings or anything like that, we will eventually return to the city when the TRZ closes. They could take action to close it earlier. If they don't, it will dissolve at the end of the calendar year. This does have an impact to the RMA. We talked about it during the budget. That BABS credit was an ongoing source of revenue for us. It had been declining as predicted as we paid down the debt, but when we refinanced, which saved taxpayers projected $4 million, it meant our subsidy had shrunk even more, or our portion of it had shrunk even more. Now that's going away for future years. So it does have an impact us, but we're acting on the city's behalf and at their direction on what to do with these. It does save $20 million in potential interest. That's the scheduled interest payments that would have been owed on the loans had they not been retired. Yes, so what this did is it freed up the TRZ would no longer be coming to the RMA, and instead it returned, I think they said, around $8 million to the city. But doing so also meant the city had to recalculate its no new revenue tax rate, and that apparently also led to $18 million. So the city had a bunch of money, and they spent, after the discussion of the plan, they spent their time discussing how they wanted to spend those dollars. But yes, what it does is it means an increase in ongoing revenue to the city's general fund. Could you turn your mic on?
What are the potential implications of ending the TERS, just for
So
local match?
Yes, there will no longer be that source to do projects with. You
Okay.
could still fund the projects with those same dollars that will be now going to the general fund, but this is dedicated for transportation along the corridor that I showed you here. So any funds generated by the TRZ in those different colored areas would have to be spent within those areas. So you could do any projects within that zone. And you still could, you just don't have the dedicated revenue source.
Does that include the downtown widening?
So the downtown, so
That's
this
not in
TRZ,
that, is it?
this TRZ does not actually run on I-10 through downtown. It runs along Montana.
Oh, okay.
So it could not have been used for the downtown widening.
Okay, so that's irrelevant then. I was just curious, because I know some people were concerned about eliminating it, and I didn't know if that was one of the reasons, so, okay,
So there's no action on this, but it is just an update to you all.
okay.
There's obvious implications on actions that we're working on with TRZ number 3, and how we approach that with the city. Was that as part of any of the discussion at all with Robert, or what?
No, sir, TRZ was not discussed. TRZ 3 is not, as I would call it, as mature as TRZ 2. So as you saw, TRZ 2 covers a big swath of the city and high-value corridors. So the revenue has really increased as property values in those areas have increased. TRZ 3 was less developed at the time. While it has seen development, it is not, it's a much smaller zone, and it is doing well, but it's not doing as well as TRZ 2. But TRZ 3 was not part of those discussions. As a reminder, TRZ 3, the debt is paid off next year and would expire next December 31st.
Okay.
Are you aware of any conversations about that in relationship to the Northeast Parkway?
We've had a couple. We've had, I believe we've been approached by some folks. You want? jump in here?
It looks like you're looking to me.
Yeah.
Ray Mateus, Executive Director. Yes, we've had several conversations there. In particular, Representative Molinar is interested in trying to utilize TRZ number 3 revenues for the Borderline Expressway project. So we have provided him with background information on the TRZ, historical information, and what we could use it for heading into the future. So that has been shared with the City of El Paso.
Okay. All right, so there's no action?
No, ma'am.
All right, is there any other discussion? Then I'm going to move on to number 5, discussion and action on board resolutions authorizing the following actions as they relate to the John Hayes Street Extension Project. 5A, amendment to work authorization number 2 with CEA Engineering Group, and B, amendment to work authorization number 37 with Atkins North America.
Ms. Wilson, for the record, I would like to note 5A is actually work authorization number 1, not number 2. So for the record. So John Hayes was split into 2 phases. So there wasn't enough funds. So the county coordinated with the MPO and TxDOT to split it into 2 phases. The first phase we actually let last month, and we'll be bringing that contract for award before this board in September. However, phase 2, we still need to finalize those plans and get them ready to let for phase 2, which I believe is in FY25 or FY24. Mr. Fino, 25?
Yes.
It's 25. So I think we're still 2 years away from that. But what we're going to do is get the plans ready now. And then there's also funding to be able to go back 6 months prior to letting, see if anything has changed with TxDOT specs that we would need to update again, so that those plans are absolutely up to date for when we go to let phase 2 of John Hayes. So we're adding $127,730.45 to the agreement with CEA to do this, and then $29,752.83 with Atkins for the oversight work. But this is to get the design plans for phase 2 ready for letting, and then to double check them and make sure that they're fully up to date when we actually get there in 2 years. And I'd recommend approval.
Is there any discussion, questions? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay, so we're on number 6, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the execution of an amendment to the interlocal agreement with El Paso County for the Fabens Airport Improvement Project.
You may recall that last month we brought 4 or 5 of these before you. We had to delete 2 of them. This is what we deleted. We brought it back because it's just really one item. What we're doing here as a refresher is adding language that makes it clear that the CRRMA will charge admin fees to the county. This is necessary as the county is reviewing its grant-funded projects, and so that there's very clear language to show any granting agency that this is an authorized expense. Normally, we just say, look, this is the design contract, this is the oversight contract, and then the remainder we've coordinated with the county and said, that will be our fee, but we're not explicit about it. So the county has requested that we add this language for projects that have grant funds so that it works for their grant office. We did the same thing last month. This is the 2 we deleted and brought back as just one item. I'd recommend approval.
Any questions? I'll entertain a motion.
So moved. Second.
Okay, I have a motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. All right, item 7 is presentation and required training on ethics and the requirements of the CRRMA internal compliance program.
So I'll ask Brian O'Reilly, our
Don't we
counsel.
have to do training now?
You have to do training, yes, ma'am. And so we've got a PowerPoint, and IT has brought that up. And so I'll ask Brian to go through it. And Brian, you just let me know when you'd like me to switch slides.
Sure. Good morning. Brian O'Reilly with Outside Counsel with Lock Lord. I guess make sure y'all can hear me okay. So this is the required ethics training that's we do this periodically. I think the last time we did this was 2 years ago. And so a lot of this, if you were here then, will be the same and as what you heard back then. And it's really, we're going to give an overview of all the requirements that you're subject to, and the source of those. And so, Robert, you want to go to the next slide, and we'll. So that we're going to go over your ethics and internal compliance program, which was adopted in December of 2009. All RMAs and entities that receive financial assistance from TxDOT are required to have this. And it's designed to detect and prevent violations of law, regulations, and ethical standards, and it's applicable to all board members and employees. Next one. So the training requirements, so as I said, the requirements are periodic ethics training, and so we recommend every 2 years. And the goal here is to be familiar with your compliance policy, the bylaws, your conflict of interest policies. You have a record retention policy, drug and alcohol policy, and your procurement policies. That's all. A lot of this comes from all of those different policies. And so here's the topics we're going to go over today. So we'll jump into it. Conflict of interest. So this one, you can go to the next one, Robert. So these requirements here come from the RMA Act, Chapter 370, and so really, what board members, what you can't do, you can't accept employment or engage in business activities that might induce disclosure of confidential information, accept employment or compensation that might impair your independence of judgment. You can't make investments that could create a conflict between your private interest and the RMA, or have a personal interest in an RMA contract. And the next two also apply to your spouse, but you can't be employed by or own or control more than 10% interest in a business that's regulated by or receives funds from TxDOT, the RMA, or the city of El Paso, or use or receive a substantial amount of goods or services or money from those entities, TxDOT, the RMA, or the city. Next slide. And then there are some requirements in the local government code applicable to all public officials. So there's two here we're going to talk about. So Chapter 171 of the local government code, which requires an affidavit to be filed, and you abstain from participation in a matter that could have a special economic effect on a business entity or real property in which the member has a substantial interest. And in a second, we're going to go over what those terms, special economic effect, substantial interest, what those mean. And then the other requirement to be aware of is under Chapter 176. And this is a conflict disclosure statement to disclose a business relationship with or receipt of a gift from a vendor or a potential vendor. So let's talk about Chapter 171 on that affidavit. Next slide, Robert. So this applies if a matter involves a business entity or real property in which you as a board member have a substantial interest, and if the action will have a special economic effect on the entity or the property. So under Chapter 171, a substantial interest, it's in a business entity means 10% that you own 10% or more of shares, 10% or more, or $15,000 or more of the fair market value of the entity, or you receive funds from the entity that exceed 10% of your previous year's income. And a substantial interest in real property means your ownership interest as a fair market value of $2,500 or more. And the term special economic effect here means an effect distinguishable from the effect on the general public. And this extends to an interest held by a first-degree relative. And here it's important to note that you must file the affidavit before the vote or decision and abstain from further participation. So this is, a good reminder to review agendas beforehand and understand, what items you're voting on, and so you can know if any of that applies. And now under Chapter 176, that conflict disclosure statement I mentioned. You have to file this if you or your family member have an employment or other business relationship with a vendor that results in receipt of taxable income of $2,500 or more in the preceding year. If you accept one or more gifts from a vendor with an aggregate value of $100 or more in the preceding year, or if you have a family relationship with a vendor. And so here, vendor means a person or entity who enters or seeks to enter into a contract with the RMA. And here, unlike the prior requirement, you have to file this just within 7 business days of becoming aware of the facts that require the filing. And in either event, if you have any questions or need the form, I think Raymond has it, and he can always contact me too if we need to discuss it. Okay, next, gifts and honoraria. So board members, you cannot accept or solicit any gift or favor or benefit that might reasonably influence you in the discharge of your official duty, including procurement decisions, or that's being offered in an attempt to influence the member. Can't accept it from a potential vendor during a pending procurement, and can't accept if it's offered as an honorarium for appearing at a conference, workshop, or seminar. Now, next slide, Robert. You can accept reimbursement from the RMA for actual expenses incurred in the performance of your official duties, and gifts from family members or friends, independent of official status with the RMA, and certain transportation, lodging, and meals accepted as a guest. And the acceptance of any gift is subject to conflict of interest laws. And so if you're unsure, if you can accept a gift, either decline it or seek advice from legal counsel, and again, Raymond can help coordinate that if needed. Use of the RMA and city property, the computers and software, including your email systems, phones, everything there. It's all, if it's owned or leased by the RMA or provided the RMA by the city, should be used for official business only, and lost or stolen property must be reported immediately. All right, so now we're going to jump into Public Information Act, just some best practice. Any communication regarding RMA business, it's subject to the PIA. So, and it doesn't really matter what the medium is or the public and private nature of the device. So, your text messages on your personal device, if you're using your personal email account, if it's about RMA business, it's subject to the act. So, the best practice is avoid using personal email or social media accounts for RMA business. Forward any communications related to RMA business to the RMA server. So if there is a request, it can be pulled, and preserve communications on personal devices until they've been forwarded and observe litigation holds. And again, those are your best practices to kind of, help to keep you out of any hot water if any event something were to come up. Open meetings. I think everyone's probably familiar with walking quorum, but avoid successive one-on-one meetings with other board members outside of an open meeting. Whether in person, by open electronic means. Don't send texts or emails during an open meeting. Use caution when you're replying all, in case other board members are on it. And do not participate in a meeting that has not been properly called or a closed session that's not authorized. And be aware that public officials can be held criminally liable for certain violations of the Open Meetings Act. So I just have this next slide. I actually gave a CLE presentation a month ago on Open Meetings Act and Public Information Act issues. And in researching that, I came across this story. This Angelina County judge, she was arrested in March of earlier this year. And he had met with officials outside of the parameters of the Open Meetings Act. And from what I could gather, it's pretty egregious. But, he was in June, he was sentenced to 35 days in jail, and $350 fine. So, it's just to let you know, it could be serious. But again, his violations were rather egregious. All right, so personal finance statements. I think everyone is aware of this as well, but you must file it with the Ethics Commission annually. Electronic filing is, I actually believe now it's actually preferred. It was required, but I think you can go back to a paper statement if you desire, but they prefer electronic filing. It covers financial activity for the preceding year. It's due April 30th or the next business day if it's, but you can request one extension if needed. Compliance standards and procedures. And so a suspected violation of law or RMA policies must be reported immediately to the executive director or the chair. The executive director or chair will take and enforce appropriate remedial measures or sanctions, and retaliation for reporting suspected violations will not be tolerated. So if you have any questions, please direct them to Raymond, and I'm sure Raymond can bring us in if needed. And that's it. That's the ethics training for the year. And so if there are any questions, let me know. If you have specific questions about something specific, maybe we'll talk offline. But
Thank you very much. Any questions, folks? Okay, everybody in compliance, I hope. All right, with that then, I'm going to move to Item 8, which is discussion and possible action on a staff report regarding the status of Pelicano Drive widening project. I'm also going to read 9 into the record because both are going to require executive session, and that way we can just go in at once for both of them instead of having to come in and out. Number 9, discussion and action on a board resolution approving the executive director's annual performance evaluation and authorizing the chair to communicate the results of the evaluation to the city and take other actions as necessary. Having said that, it is.
Can I, excuse me, if I could, I'd like to read a couple of items into the
Oh,
record
okay,
for
sorry,
the
yeah,
public,
that's
and
fine.
then I'll ask us to go into executive. So again, Raymond Tejas, Executive Director of the Comunidad Regional Mobility Authority. I do want to share a couple of recent developments with the public on the Pelicano project before I ask you to retire into executive session. So in terms of outreach, we have updated the webpage. Last week we did that. received a few calls and a few emails over this past month, and shared some updates with the public directly. There has been some coordination with the surety as it relates to some of the developers in the area. So as you know, this area is being developed, so we have fairly regular calls from developers asking if they can connect to water lines under Pelicano, if they can bore under to run communication lines and that sort of thing. So we've coordinated those activities with the surety, and since last month, we've allowed for the placement of several communication lines under Pelicano. And we've also worked with the county as they are partnering with a developer to expand one of the ponds out there and bring on a development that the county is seeking. So we've, although it's extremely frustrating, the road has not made any progress. There are developers that are making some progress in their development. So that's some good news. And then from there, it's really updates on the bankruptcy and the default items that we normally bring. So on the bankruptcy, as a reminder from prior meetings, back in May, the contractor had secured insurance, general liability, and equipment insurance, but had not secured vehicle coverage, if you recall. And so the contractor was supposed to come back to the court with a financing plan to cover the vehicle coverage that they were missing. Nothing happened up until last Friday, where there was a special hearing requested. And at that hearing, the contractor requested approval of an approach to secure vehicle insurance, and it was denied. It was denied for various reasons, but ultimately the judge denied the contractor's motion to use cash collateral to secure vehicle insurance. So that was an important development last week. In addition to that, within the last couple of weeks, the Attorney General's office, on behalf of TxDOT, has submitted a motion to lift stay so that they can pursue their rights under the Cesar Chavez project, which is one of the bonded projects that this contractor had. The hearing for that motion is scheduled for September 12th. And lastly, 2 additional creditors have a hearing today where they are seeking a motion to lift stay for their claims as well. So that's happening today, and we'll be monitoring that one as well. And so that takes us then to the default. Our attorneys continue to work with the surety and coordinate with the surety as we move through this process. I will say on the contractor side, you may recall that the contractor had requested a meeting with us to try to resolve their dispute. We held a meeting with them back on July 21st and had a follow-up meeting that was offered for yesterday. And so this process is ongoing. So that's what I'd like to share with the public. This process is ongoing, but I would ask that you retire into executive session so we can share with our attorneys a little more detail. There was a meeting, and I can give you much more details in executive. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so thank you for the public update, and with that, the time is now 10:01 on August the 9th, 2023, and the RMA Board of Directors will now retire into executive session pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.071 for purpose of consultation with attorney, and on Section 551.407 for the purpose of deliberating personnel matters. We will reconvene in open session upon conclusion of the executive session. And with that, I will ask anyone who's not relevant to the Pelicano widening project that needs to stay in the meeting to please leave. There's no other regular business, so once we finish this, we'll come take action on these items if there's anything necessary in public, but there won't, that's the end of the agenda. Okay, great, thank you. So it is now 11 a.m. on August 9th, 2023, and the Board of Directors of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority is reconvening its open meeting after deliberations in executive session pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.071 and 551.074. The board has consulted with its attorney and discussed personnel matters, but no action in executive session was taken. So with that, going back to item 8, discussion and possible action on a staff report regarding the status of the Pelicano Drive widening project. There's no action on that item. So I'm going to move to the next item, which was discussion and action on a board resolution approving the executive director's annual performance evaluation and authorizing the RMA chair to communicate the results of the evaluation to the city and take other actions as necessary. So Raymond, just for the public record, the board discussed the compilation of the input, the collective input, final evaluation, and the supporting kind of narrative. I told them I had shared that with you prior to the meeting today. I think we're in a consensus with the evaluation. As presented, everyone agrees that you've done a really good job this year, and we've made a lot of progress in some key areas. The areas where we continue to want focus is to really build the capacity of the organization, meaning add an additional person to support you so that you all can continue to sort of grow the enterprise and take advantage of emerging opportunities, which we see evolving with all of the federal money coming down, some of the state surplus, some opportunities, I think, with the city that we haven't had up until recently, some of the emerging opportunities that we're doing with the smaller jurisdictions. And just with all of that, I mean, there's going to be a capacity issue with just 2 people. Both of you are very talented, and we want to make sure that we're using your talents as effectively and efficiently. And so hopefully, the additional staff person, well, you can figure out like where that person can best free you 2 up, so that you all can continue to add value where your skills allow us to really grow the organization. I think we agreed you've done a really great job of allowing Robert to evolve in his role and expand, and we think that's great. We also want to make sure that you have time to be able to focus more externally and continue to like make the region aware of what we're doing, continue to work with partners, take advantage of transportation-related advocacy and organization groups where they make them known about us, and just sort of the communication and public awareness of all the great work we're doing. One of the things I think we said is that over the course of the next several years, as we're doing some really great work now, I think particularly with the smaller communities, which we all believe is really critical to their economic growth and viability, we need to promote that more. So maybe working with our marketing and communication person to really kind of do like media updates, like here's what here's like RMA projects and work, getting some little more exposure I think would be really exciting, not just for us, but for the communities too. And so with that, I want to, on behalf of the board, thank you for your hard work and dedication to the RMA. I'm going to let other board members provide input as well, but what we'd like to do is take action today to approve your evaluation, to offer you the full 5% salary adjustment based on your contract, and then an additional $5,000 lump sum award, merit award. And if there's anything in the evaluation that you have questions about or need clarification or don't necessarily agree with in terms of like the feedback that I'm giving now, I want to give you an opportunity to do that as well. And then I'll allow the board members here present to have any other input they'd like to have.
Well, at the outset, thank you all very much. I appreciate that. I appreciate everything that you've shared with me, and most importantly, I appreciate the support that you all give me and the ability to, for Robert and I to go out and do what we're doing. So thank you all for that. In terms of the comments, I think all of those comments are in line with everything certainly you just noted right now, but also with what you all have been saying along throughout this last year. So I think I'm comfortable with everything I saw in there. So again, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, great. Mr. Vice Chair?
Just a personal thanks, okay? Just as a board member here, I think I'm terming out. I think this is my last allowable term, and the amount that I've grown here because of you and how much I've learned about this whole process, I'm very appreciative of. And from what I've seen from my perspective and my experience level, you're amazing. You do a great job for us, but we don't give you the resources to reach the potential of what we as a board and we as a agency would like to achieve, and we want to work on that in the future. But thank you for everything that you do for us and for our community. Thank you very much.
Ms. Bird?
Well,
I'm
I
sorry.
would also like to thank you, and I always tell you how much influence you are on the members, and how because of your knowledge and guidance, we can better be prepared when we vote on projects. And so I think this is great, and like I said, I always tell you how well you're doing, and I just want to say thank you.
And I guess as the most junior member, no, I really appreciate the onboarding you all do. I think it's very helpful, and the level of institutional knowledge that you have, I think, provides for a more in-depth onboarding process for new board members, for discussion of, projects and matters that we're voting on. And so it makes you feel comfortable when you're making decisions here, when we have that backup and that trust on our executive director that we know, he's guiding us and providing us good information. So thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
And even though not all the board members are here, the evaluation represents their collective input as well. So even though they couldn't be here, they did contribute to the process in terms of the evaluation. And I'm sure that they'll be supportive of the action that we're going to take today with regard to you. So with that, I'll ask for a motion to approve the board resolution, which in fact affirms approving the performance evaluation for Raymond Tejas for the year ending August 31st, 2023, which exceeds expectation, and that the annual salary be increased by 5% effective September 1, 2023, and a lump sum payment of $5,000, and that the chair be authorized to communicate the results of the executive director's evaluation to the city, and the salary increase to the city as well. So it's a part of his personnel record.
I so move.
I
I
have a
second
motion
it.
and a second. Any further conversation? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Well done. And again, I'll sign whatever needs to be signed, Robert, to allow you to move that forward. So if not today, then I could even do it electronically and scan it to you, so you've got it for the record, and then, yeah, okay.
Yeah, just give me a call.
Or if you want us to come by or something like later on, that's fine too.
I might add a thank you to Norman.
Yes, Norman.
Yeah, November Golf up there on the circle, so thank you, buddy. Look forward to seeing you one of these days if you ever get back.
I look forward to seeing you all as well, and I'll try to plan a trip when the weather cools down.
Thank you, Norman, for all your help.
Thank you, and if I can just add one word to Monica, if you'll say hello to everybody for me at your place.
I will. Hope you're doing very well.
I'm doing fine, thank you. Robert, you have a copy of the resolution in your email.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so before we adjourn, I just want to say note one thing. I was contacted this past week by the Texas Tribune organization. They host this event, the Texas Tribune. I don't know what, it's like a conference every year, or they host different opportunities. And they've asked me to sit in on a transportation panel that's going to be held on September 22nd. I think the conference is the 21st through the 23rd. The 22nd is a Saturday, and it's a panel on transportation, and it's going to have state, federal officials. I may have, actually, if I've got the full program now, I'll send it to Raymond and Robert and have it send it to you all. But they wanted a local perspective, and interestingly, the county judge gave them my name, And so when he called me, he thought that it would be good because of the role of the RMA, and particularly doing a lot of work here with the county and the region, and also because of my past history in local government, and they felt it would be good to have a local perspective. So I've agreed to do it, and so I'm looking forward to that opportunity to represent you all in that capacity, and I'll keep you posted as things move forward on that as well. Okay? So that's a really good opportunity. And
I've not heard of that organization.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
And it's apparently a big conference they do, and they focus on like key things and topics. And he mentioned to me that that day, the 22nd, I guess El Paso Live or whatever, I think the region's going to have a lot of stuff going on that's El Paso focused. So what I might want to do is follow up and have you all follow up to see what they're doing. And maybe it's a good opportunity to put some information out about the RMA while we're going to be there, to include it with whatever kind of promotion it is. So that might be just like low-hanging fruit to get some materials about the Mobility Authority and some of the big projects and stuff we're doing here. And then, as we talked about capacity and stuff, you know, previously, now that we've got two firms kind of on board, we talked about some opportunities to have them do some work that are kind of like indirect project, not project specific. So as you're looking at capacity too, if there's a way to use them, I mean, we talked about them maybe doing some of the grant development if we needed stuff like that. Let's continue to think about that, because both of them are really good companies and have a lot of resources that maybe we could kind of leverage in a more non-traditional role. And since you're here, I just want to put that out there as food for thought. I know we haven't had to do a lot of grants yet, I don't think, but there may be some down the road. But if there's other things we could leverage their skills and resources to support what we're doing, I'd like to take advantage of that, even if we have to come in and look at some budget implications.
Certainly, we'll do that,
Okay.
and we'll continue doing that.
Okay.
I
Is
just
it-
have something to say.
Sure.
And even in our finance meeting, we have discussed that.
Good.
We
Good.
really do discuss a lot of things in our meetings, so that has even come up
Good.
also. Even different events that are here locally to get involved in, but we discuss a lot of things in that finance meeting.
Now, and I actually think that and the planning committee are like opportunities to really drill down into some of these things that we might not necessarily do at the board. So I would encourage you all then, when we have meetings, I know we do reports, committee reports, that maybe if you want to spend more time on some of the brainstorming that you're doing, and maybe like have some really detailed discussions at some of our meetings, I'd be happy to have that too.
All right, thank you.
All right. All right, so if there's no other business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Right?
So moved.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Meeting adjourned, 11:13 a.m. Thank you, everyone.